The hypothetical scenario in which Brigadier General Ali Jahanshahi orders a 15-tank assault on United States forces represents a seismic shift in Middle Eastern geopolitics, fundamentally altering the established rules of engagement. As the deputy commander for coordination of the Artesh, Iran's regular army, Jahanshahi's direct involvement signals a departure from the gray zone asymmetric warfare typically conducted by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. Instead, this maneuver marks a transition towards state-sanctioned, conventional warfare, a decision that unequivocally originates from the highest echelons of Tehran's power structure. Within Iran's rigid theocratic hierarchy, a general of Jahanshahi's standing possesses no authority to unilaterally initiate hostilities that could trigger a regime-ending conflict. Therefore, this command acts not as a rogue improvisation, pre-delegated authority, but as the execution of a strategic directive approved by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. It functions as a direct message from the Iranian state, bypassing the usual proxy buffers to engage in a calculated escalation. Tactically, utilizing a company-sized armored element against a fortified U.S. installation like Al-Assad or Al-Tanf would be suicidal given American air superiority. Consequently, the operational target is almost certainly a vulnerability node, such as a mechanized patrol or a remote logistical outpost near the Syrian border. The objective is psychological shock rather than territorial conquest, aiming to inflict high-visibility casualties on American personnel using 125mm direct fire. To mitigate the political fallout while ensuring operational competence, the assault force would likely employ a hybrid manning strategy. While the tactical precision required to coordinate 15 tanks suggests the crew consists of Iranian regulars, they would likely operate without standard insignia or under the banners of elite proxies like the Popular Mobilization Forces, PMF. This attempts to maintain a thin veil of plausible deniability, though the deployment of heavy armor makes such deniability tenuous at best. Furthermore, such an operation would not occur in a vacuum. The survivability of this armored column depends entirely on combined arms support. Hezbollah detachments would almost certainly provide essential infantry screening, utilizing man-pads and Cornet anti-tank missiles to protect the armored flanks from U.S. aerial and ground counterattacks. Simultaneously, Russian assets in the theater, while avoiding direct kinetic engagement to prevent a global war, would likely play a critical role in the electromagnetic spectrum. By providing real-time satellite intelligence and deploying electronic warfare systems like the Krasuka-4 to degrade U.S. communications and radar response times, Moscow would ensure the strike achieves maximum lethality before the inevitable American retaliation. Ultimately, General Jahanshahi's order would not merely be a battlefield command, but a definitive act of war. Yet the deployment of 15 main battle tanks under the direct command of General Ali Jahanshahi represents a calculated wager of high-value assets against American technological supremacy. To execute this maneuver, Jahanshahi would almost certainly bypass the Artesh's obsolete chieftain fleets, instead fielding Iran's modern Iron Fist. This formation would likely consist of a spearhead of advanced Karar tanks, indigenous platforms mirroring the capabilities of the Russian T-90MS, supported by upgraded T-72S units fitted with contact-reactive armor. While formidable on paper, utilizing such heavy armor in an open desert environment against entrenched U.S. positions is less an attempt at conquest and more a deliberate provocation. Tactically, this armored column would face a layered and lethal American defense that renders the outcome a foregone conclusion. Even in the absence of a permanent garrison of M1 Abrams tanks at outposts like Al-Tanf, U.S. expeditionary forces possess a decisive asymmetric advantage. The initial Iranian advance would be met by FGM-148 Javelin missiles, whose top attack capability would devastate the tank formation's command vehicles before they reached effective firing range. Furthermore, American air superiority remains the ultimate arbiter of such engagements. The appearance of heavy armor would trigger the immediate deployment of AH-64E Apache Guardians, or a 10 Thunderbolt IIs, turning the desert floor into a kill zone. Crucially, the U.S. rules of engagement, ROE, in the CENTCOM theater do not require American commanders to absorb the first blow. The coordinated movement of a tank company toward a U.S. base establishes undeniable hostile intent. Consequently, U.S. forces would be authorized to conduct a preemptive strike, neutralizing the threat before the Iranian gunners could even acquire their targets. The result would be the total destruction of the Iranian unit, with casualties likely exceeding 50 personnel, while U.S. forces would sustain minimal damage, primarily to perimeter defenses or light vehicles. Given the near certainty of tactical annihilation, the operation's true objective cannot be territorial gain. Instead, this suicidal charge is best understood as a sophisticated strategic feint. By drawing the full attention of U.S. satellite networks, reconnaissance aircraft, and quick reaction forces to a high-intensity conventional firefight, Tehran creates a temporary blind spot elsewhere in the theater. This diversion creates a window of opportunity for the covert transfer of strategic assets, such as ballistic missile components or nuclear-related materials, across the porous Iraq-Syria border. General Jahanshahi's tanks are not intended to win a battle. They are intended to burn, serving as a costly distraction that allows a far more dangerous payload to slip through the cracks of American surveillance unnoticed. The geographical theater for General Ali Jahanshahi's armored offensive would almost certainly be the volatile seam between the Iranian stronghold of Al-Bukamal in Syria and the U.S. garrison at Al-Tanf, or the Konoko gas fields in Deir ez-Zor. This specific coordinate is not chosen at random. It represents the critical choke point of Tehran's land bridge, the corridor connecting Tehran to Beirut. However, initiating a tank assault here transforms the operation into a tactical nightmare due to the unforgiving topography of the Badiat al-Sham. While the hard-packed, flat desert terrain theoretically supports the high-speed maneuver warfare of T-72S and Karar tanks, allowing for rapid formation deployment, the total absence of natural cover creates a killing zone. In this environment, the thermal signature of 15 main battle tanks would be glaringly visible to American infrared sensors against the cool desert floor, rendering them sitting ducks for U.S. aerial interdiction long before they reached visual range of American ground troops. Logistically, the operation is fundamentally brittle. Launching likely from the fortified underground bunkers of the Imam Ali military base, the armored column remains tethered to a vulnerable supply line. Tanks are voracious consumers of fuel. Without a constant stream of logistical support, the offensive creates its own culmination point within hours. U.S. forces would likely exploit this by targeting the unarmored fuel and ammunition trucks, trailing the formation rather than the tanks themselves. By severing this umbilical cord with drone strikes, the U.S. can immobilize the heavy armor, turning formidable war machines into static metal coffins stranded in the sand. Furthermore, the airspace dynamics virtually guarantee the destruction of Jahanshahi's force. The skies above eastern Syria are dominated by the U.S.-led coalition, CJTF-OIR. Iran's strategic air defense umbrellas, such as the Bavar 373, are deployed too deep within Iranian borders to cover an expeditionary force this far west. Consequently, the tank column would be forced to operate naked, relying only on organic short-range defenses like MANPADS or ZSU-23 Shilkas, which are woefully inadequate against high-altitude precision bombing or standoff munitions. The geopolitical shockwaves of such a suicidal maneuver would be immediate. Israel would likely interpret this escalation as a green light for a massive mowing the grass campaign, striking Iranian infrastructure across Syria to prevent further entrenchment. Simultaneously, Saudi Arabia and the UAE would face an acute security crisis, fearing that Iranian retaliation for U.S. counterstrikes might target their oil infrastructure, mirroring the 2019 Aramco attacks. Thus, the attack would not only result in the tactical annihilation of the tank unit, but also destabilize the delicate deterrence architecture of the entire Middle East. To mitigate the overwhelming advantage of American night vision capabilities, General Ali Jahanshahi's armored assault would likely commence during the Begin Morning Nautical Twilight, BMNT. Attacking at night against a force that possesses third-generation FLIR technology is tantamount to suicide. The high thermal contrast of tank engines against the cool desert night renders them indefensible targets. Therefore, the visual ambiguity of dawn, or perhaps the cover of a seasonal sandstorm, offers the only, albeit slim, hope for the survival of the 15-tank column. This operation is not an isolated military maneuver, but a kinetic extension of political desperation, and the directive likely materializes during a critical deadlock in nuclear negotiations, JCPOA, or within 48 hours of a high-profile Israeli assassination of an Iranian official. In this context, the tanks serve as a violent form of leverage, a tangible message to Western powers that Tehran retains the capacity to destabilize the region instantly. However, the execution of such a radical order would trigger immediate internal friction. A significant latency period, likely 30 minutes to an hour, would separate Jahanshahi's command from actual track movement. Subordinate commanders, recognizing the futility of the mission, would likely demand verification via secure channels or feign technical malfunctions to delay the inevitable. During this window of hesitation, the American kill chain would already be active. U.S. space-based infrared systems, SBIRS, would detect the thermal bloom of 15 igniting engines instantly, followed by JSTARS radar tracking, confirming a hostile vector. American Signals Intelligence, SIGINT, would likely intercept the panicked radio traffic of the Iranian crews long before they crossed the line of departure. Consequently, the time elapsed between the detection of movement and the first American counterfire would be less than 20 minutes. Once the column commits to the open desert, the engagement would be mercilessly brief. This would not be a protracted battle of maneuver comparable to historical conflicts, but a high-technology execution. American air assets, specifically AH-64E Apaches or A-10 Thunderbolts, would intercept the formation well outside the range of the tank's main guns. The physical confrontation would conclude in under an hour, resulting in the total neutralization of the armored company. Yet, while the tactical event would be over in minutes, the geopolitical fallout of this 45-minute skirmish would reverberate for decades, fundamentally altering the security architecture of the Middle East. The decision by General Ali Jahanshahi to commit 15 main battle tanks against U.S. forces signifies a profound doctrinal shift, moving Iran from the deniable gray zone of proxy warfare into the volatile red zone of state-on-state conflict. Unlike the expendable Shahed drones or proxy militias typically employed to harass American interests, main battle tanks are undeniable sovereign assets of the Artesh. Their deployment constitutes a direct challenge to American resolve, signaling that Tehran is willing to risk conventional confrontation to break a geopolitical stalemate. The scale of this force is calibrated with chilling precision. A reinforced company of 15 tanks represents a Goldilocks number, substantial enough to overrun a remote U.S. outpost and inflict politically damaging casualties, yet sufficiently limited to preclude a full-scale American invasion or a trigger of NATO Article 5. These armored units are tactical, sacrificial pawns. Tehran understands they will inevitably be destroyed by superior American air power, but their destruction serves a higher strategic purpose. By sacrificing a limited number of obsolete or export-grade hulls, Iran forces the U.S. to engage in a kinetic ground war, gambling that a war-weary Washington will offer diplomatic concessions to avoid a spiraling conflict rather than risk a wider regional conflagration. Politically, this aggression acts as a violent lever, likely timed to coincide with stalled nuclear negotiations, JCPOA, or as a retaliatory signal following a covert Israeli strike. It challenges the U.S. red line, testing whether the current administration has the stomach for war. Furthermore, the public attribution of this order to General Jahanshahi provides the supreme leader with a vital diplomatic off-ramp. This is the scapegoat theory in action. Should the American retaliation prove too severe or the domestic backlash too great, the regime can disavow the attack as the unauthorized action of a rogue general. Tehran can then purge Jahanshahi to de-escalate tensions, claiming to have restored order while having already achieved the goal of shaking the foundations of regional security. Ultimately, the 15 tanks are not intended to win a battle, They are ammunition in a high-stakes psychological war, spent to purchase political leverage. The mobilization of 15 main battle tanks into a striking position against U.S. forces, without triggering immediate annihilation by American satellite arrays, requires a mastery of deception and subterranean logistics. General Ali Jahanshahi's operation would likely originate from the deep underground bunkers of the Imam Ali military base on the Syrian-Iraq border, a facility designed specifically to shield heavy armor from synthetic aperture radar. To traverse the final miles to the line of departure, these assets would not march in formation, but would be transported on commercial lowboy trucks concealed under Nakjid multispectral thermal blankets. These countermeasures reduce infrared signatures by up to 80%, allowing the tanks to blend into the desert floor's thermal background, appearing as innocuous civilian freight until the moment of deployment. As the column transitions from transport to attack formation, the kinetic assault would be preceded by a violent disruption of the electromagnetic spectrum. Iranian electronic warfare units utilizing systems like the Cobra 5-8 or Russian Avtabata would initiate high-power jamming to sever UHF/VHF communications and spoof GPS signals. This creates a temporary fog of war, blinding U.S. tactical decision-makers and degrading the accuracy of satellite-guided munitions during the critical initial minutes. Furthermore, the tanks would not operate in isolation. They would function as the armored core of a hybrid swarm. Loitering munitions like the Shahed 136 would target American observation posts, while technicals manned by proxy militias would flank the armor to suppress anti-tank teams, creating a combined arms dilemma for the defenders. However, once the element of surprise evaporates, the U.S. response would transform the battlefield into a multi-domain kill box. The initial Iranian thrust would be blunted by ground-based Javelin and TOW-2B missiles, striking the tank's vulnerable top armor. The decisive blow, however, would come from the air. AH-64E Apache Guardians, hovering in hull-down positions kilometers away, would systematically dismantle the column with Hellfire missiles, while electronic warfare aircraft like the EA-18G Growler would isolate the Iranian crews from their command structure. Ultimately, the most critical maneuvering would occur not on the battlefield, but through backchannels. As the dust settles on the burning hulls, Washington and Tehran would immediately activate deconfliction lines via the Swiss embassy or Russian intermediaries to prevent a slide into World War III. The outcome relies on plausible deniability. Tehran would disavow the attack as the unauthorized action of a rogue element, and the U.S. would accept this narrative to avoid the necessity of a regime change war. General Jahanshahi, having served his purpose as a provocateur, he would become the operation's final casualty, removed from command or eliminated to close the diplomatic file, cementing his role as the sacrificial lamb in a high-stakes geopolitical gamble.